AI solves threat detection, or does it? Here's the truth. AI fails in the most strange and insane ways, but then it turns around and finds things that no analyst would ever notice. It's brilliant 1 minute and blind the next. And that raises the real question, how do you test a security product that's designed to detect the undetectable? In this video, I'm sitting down with Zack Korman, CTO of Pistachio, to unpack exactly that. We're digging into what insider threat is, what are non-deterministic threats, what are negative signals. We're going to talk about why AI behaves the way it does, both the insane ways and the amazing, impressive ways. We're going to discuss how to evaluate these AI-driven platforms, these AI threat detection products. How do we test them and prove and validate that they're going to work for us before we spend all the money and put them in production? So without further ado, this is my conversation with Zack Korman. So today I have with me Zack Korman. Zack, man, thank you for jumping on the YouTubes and chatting with me. Really looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to give a super high level introduction to Zack, but I'd like to give him an opportunity to share a little bit about his background. So Zack, CTO of Pistachio, which is AI security awareness insider threat kind of platform. Also would love to hear more about that. But Zack and I connected over X. We've been kind of commiserating and chatting back and forth about different topics on X. And this conversation is kind of a direct result of Zack going on and roasting a bunch of podcasts, which turned into me sharing an episode on threat detection, alerting and stuff. And then he had a whole bunch of thoughts and experiences, and he's building stuff to do a lot of this AI threat detection stuff. So I was like, hey, let's jump on the YouTube. Let's chat for a little bit and talk about this, because I think you've got a really unique perspective and you're building stuff directly related to this that I think is pretty cool, and it's going to answer a lot of questions about this AI threat detection. How do we detect this stuff? How do we test these security products that have AI built in? Non-deterministic threats and all sorts of cool stuff that we're going to get into. But first, why don't you just give a quick background of yourself, how you've gone from your previous career to where you're at now, and then we'll get into some of the juicy stuff.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me. It's actually a fun fact. I don't even know if you fully know this, that I started talking to you on X, and I think you were probably the first cybersecurity person I was talking to on there. Prior to that, I only talked to tech people and lived in this tech bubble. And so you actually are the one that brought me over to talking about the actual. So you're kind of this one bridge that then led me to talking as much as I do about the cybersecurity parts on that site.
So this is all my fault. I love it.
Yeah, all of the bad reviews, everything would never have happened had you not done this.
That's incredible.
I'm also conscious of the fact that by going on podcasts now, people will invariably comment underneath this thing D-, not interesting and boring. People get that was fun. But yeah, I guess about myself, you wanted me to just kind of say what I do. So I'm, as you said, the CTO of Pistachio. Before that, though, I guess just going into history of this is so actually I have a law degree from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. I was pretty into tax law, mostly because I was better at math than all of the lawyers. And so you're okay, so I could just shred them and that and just, deep levels of memorizing rules. And I think tax law was really fun because it's this optimization game in many ways where you can play with how you structure transactions. But yeah, I just did that, did a lot of international economic law stuff in university. I was quite on the academic side of law. So I did my master's then, and so I was at Oxford for my master's doing law and finance, and I got into this argument with a professor about share purchase agreements, and so I had to teach myself how to scrape the SEC website so that I could win this argument with this professor. So I got into programming by arguing with this professor. He didn't really care what I did in the end. I just got my friend to help me with some Python, and then I ended up getting quite into it. I wrote a script that automated my tax law exam from the previous year, and it gave a better answer than I did on my own exam. So
Nice.
I then was like, okay, I'll do this. And so then I ended up going, so took a year in the US doing retail electricity stuff with programming stuff with one of my friends. And then I moved to Norway and I started at a media company here. And then I ended up building up all of their personalization automation stuff. So I ended up becoming like the head of tech and product there. So I was actually like the least cybersecurity person ever. It's this great story where there was a guy on my team who was trying to force every one of the journalists to use MFA on the CMS that they were using to edit and I was like, oh, you're such a security nerd. Like, who cares? This doesn't matter. And then one day, some kids found some passwords and they hacked or logged in just to our website, and they wrote that the prime minister is a pedophile, and they put that on the front page of the second biggest paper in Norway.
Wow.
And like the prime minister had to issue a statement saying, yeah, I'm not a pedophile. And so yeah, that was kind of my cold awakening into cybersecurity. Then I started working at was a different company at the time. It was we were called Cyber, and I basically built up all the product from there. So I've been doing that the last 4 years. Poached a lot of my team from that previous job, so a lot of the people came over with me. So yeah, that's what got me here.
That's awesome. And so now you're CTO of Pistachio, and you're doing lots of fun stuff there. And one of the things I like about what you're doing is you're kind of like building in public. You know, you're sharing a lot of the behind the scenes. You're pretty transparent about the stuff that you're doing. Even, flaws. You mentioned something on X the other day about like, should I share this XSS or this issue that I had, even if it we fixed it and it's like not a thing anymore. I think you peeling back the curtains a little bit is very non-traditional, which makes sense when you learn your background, right? Like you have a very non-traditional brain, upcoming into the tech and cybersecurity industry.
Right. I think that's part of it is I don't even always know, like, should I share this or not? So I'm like, that's fine. I'll just do it. And then people will message me and be like, you probably shouldn't say that. And I'm like, whatever. Like, it's fine. But it's also a very intentional thing around, I do find coming from non-cybersecurity, I used to have this, like, my team made fun of me. They'd say I have this like nervous tick where every time I went on a podcast, they'd be like, well, I'm not a cybersecurity person. I'm a tech person. Right. And so by coming from that, I also kind of realized how opaque a lot of the cybersecurity industry is at the product side, like the vendors and stuff. There's like I can't name the CTO of like any of these vendors. I don't, I can't, and they definitely don't talk online. And then also because of what we're building is sort of on the like very new and exploratory, because we're using AI in our product quite heavily. Like we're going through, hundreds of millions of tokens a day. There are going to be things that suck. Like there are going to be things that blow up and don't work. And so you want to talk about them because in some ways you can show like what I'm doing is real, because also sometimes it fails horrifically, right? Whereas if you don't talk about it, it's sort of like, are you just making stuff up? I kind of want to reveal. And I think also just, obviously I work on a small piece of AI threat detection. Like I work on a insider threat detection that is primarily targeted at SMBs. I mean, that is very tiny compared to the world of it. And so I kind of want to also encourage more people to explore that area, because I think there's so much in cybersecurity that can be done that I'm not going to be the one doing. So like maybe someone else needs to do it. And I want to talk about it in that way so people know about it. Yeah.
And I think a lot of innovation stems from that, right? Like the discovery of building out this thing and kind of going down this path to discover what's possible from a threat detection standpoint. You in turn, you inspire other people to kind of pursue similar endeavors, but also I think a lot of innovation comes out of that pursuit of discovery, right? I think, something that Jeff Bezos, I don't know why I said his name so weird. Bezos, something that I've heard him say is about like wandering. Like you have to have time to explore and discover and to wander, for lack of a better phrase, and run into those roadblocks to figure out like where the opportunities are and where there is potential to kind of take something further,
Yeah, and especially for someone like me, who's obviously, because I didn't come from a cybersecurity background, I don't have the answers at a product level always of like what we should or shouldn't do for every detail. What I have is, so there's this great example where one of the features built in, and you might remember it, that we added to our product is basically came because someone posted like, what would you do if like I got global admin, or I got an admin's credentials in your like intra environment, and all I'm going to do is extract do data exfil, but very subtly. And how would you catch me? And I'm like, well, I'd love to think that my product would, but of course, like depending on how subtle you are, it's a question mark. And that led me to then thinking, I think I saw something else that maybe you had even posted about like using deception, something you talk about a lot. And so I started looking down this path of like how I can build canaries into my product so I can have, and then it actually led me to building, like there is a part of our product that puts in these like fake sent emails to try to trick attackers. They're kind of silly right now, but I think they can be grown on. And it came from that discussion, and it would have never happened had I not just been like kind of posting openly, like, I don't know what to do here. What do you think? And so even though that makes me somewhat like vulnerable to being like people being like, yeah, the CTO of Pistachio is a moron. Like, you can also be like, yeah, but also I'm pretty engaged, right? I'm willing to discuss what makes sense to people. And there were a lot of people who gave some really brilliant answers there that we've taken and put into our product.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think it'd be helpful. I wanted to start some of this conversation around insider threat. Like, I think it'll be helpful for us to understand why AI is needed in this case. But I think first we have to talk about like just at a base level, like what's insider threat and what are the things that we're trying to kind of combat against with something like this. And then we can kind of get into using AI for threat detection and why AI is well suited for this type of thing, and your thoughts on around that kind of thing. So let's first start about like insider threat. What is it? What are the things that we're trying to catch with this technology?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing that really sent me down this direction is this question of like people either stealing data when they leave companies to, so it's an employee who's maybe malicious, maybe just wants to take some stuff with them, whatever it may be. They're like inside your environment already. They're not like a threat actor trying to gain entry and breach you. They're there. Or maybe it could be an account takeover type context where it is a threat actor and they have gained access through like an employee, through some credentials, and they're in your system doing something, whether it's like damage or data exfiltration. And what really interested me about the problem is like how bad we were. Okay, so there were some notable cases that I saw like people posting about, like Uber had a huge settlement with Google because the Google person downloaded terabytes of data from their self-driving car unit, started a company and sold it to Uber. And I was like, the thing that strikes me about that is I'm like, how did Google not, like, he downloaded terabytes of data and you didn't catch him when he did it? You waited, you looked back in time and then said, oh, this guy did a bad thing. That's an insider threat. It's somebody inside your system taking all of your confidential, like, intellectual property and taking it, and they didn't catch it. That was like bizarre to me. And then like there were a number of cases that were similar to that I'm just like, okay, like why don't we catch it? And like, what is that? Like, what's the reason? And I guess you probably have like maybe a bit of a perspective on that, because like it depends also a lot on the environment you're in, right? Mm-hmm. So like, okay, a lot of maybe insider threat products maybe are looking at like your devices, but like if you are allowing access to cloud environment stuff not through managed devices, then like none of that's going to work. So it's like there's a bunch of different reasons why insider threat gets weird and funky. And that's kind of what drew me to it.
And so when I think about this and in our discussion, on X was the last week or a couple of weeks ago, we got into this kind of idea of like non-deterministic threats. And I think what's interesting is, the human-driven nature of all of this is unpredictable, right? We don't, for context, what I do is internal pen testing, right? And I was thinking about this over the last few days leading up to this conversation. It's like, what I do is I look for very deterministic things when I'm, attacking a network, right? It might be misconfigured permissions. It might be a credential on a file share. there's a certain amount of like deterministic nature of those things. And so the detection of those presumably would also be deterministic, right? Because if I'm going to abuse the fact that, I have insecure permissions on something, that's kind of like a known thing. We know what the abuse of that looks like. But with this, it's almost like because of human nature and because of the amount of data and the types of data and kind of the interactions and using email and web browsers and, different document formats, it sounds like the kind of behaviors that you're looking for with something like this are very much a non-deterministic thing. And I was thinking about that in the context of this question, and to kind of set up this question is like, why is it that we need something like this? And like, what is non-deterministic in this context? And why is like doing it, and you mentioned this before in the X post or the thread, is like, if I have the rules of like how to detect the thing, then we don't need AI to detect the thing. Like we just write rules for it, right? Like Sigma or Yara or whatever else. So what's non-deterministic and where does this kind of fit into this puzzle?
Right. And then I think that's kind of a big point to it. I think there was this episode, because of course now I have all these references to podcasts because I have to listen to hundreds of them.
A-D.
Yeah. There was one of the Between Two Nerds about AI malware. And they were like making this point exactly of like, I don't need AI to write new and I do think there's of course interesting things in AI malware, don't get me wrong, but they're like, if all you're doing with the AI part is making it like look for files in certain paths, like we already know where those files might be. Like there's only like 6 places you can put the files in the system that are like, especially if you know what operating system you're targeting. So it's like, you don't need AI to like figure it out loosely on, you can just write rules. What's interesting about insider threats and like a lot of, I guess, the category of like human risk is that like people behave in ways at work that are like almost identical. Like a threat, the difference between like Bob from accounting, who's just a moron and decides to send everything to his Gmail, and a real insider threat who's doing it for data exfiltration reasons. Like there's very blurry lines between those two things. People might say like, oh yeah, but both are a problem. We should get onto them. Yeah, well, it's not Bob from accounting anymore. It's the head of sales. And like, sorry, but you're going to have a hard time telling the head of sales, like, well, sorry, but here's the, there's rules, right? But like the range of acceptable behavior differs. And in addition, you can't look at individual actions. And I think this is the most interesting part to me, which is the difference between someone downloading like 12 files about like the company's financials and the difference between somebody resigning from their job and 4 minutes later downloading 12 files about financials is like the world of difference. I mean, we would all agree that the former is like someone probably doing their job as long as they have a reasonable job title to match that. And the latter is almost certainly somebody taking stuff with them as they get out of a company. And so those types of things is like, how do you write a rule to say, well, if resign, because of course, like resign is not a binary. It's like you sent an email and it maybe had a title that was notice of resignation, maybe was not in English even. Like it's, you have to look at like a range of factors to decide what's going on. And then I think one of the things, and what I was trying to talk about in some of the posts the message I was sending you was, there's this like case where it's like, okay, maybe they download 12 files like right after resigning, but then like maybe the next thing they do is like put them into a folder called like project, and then they send that project to their coworker as a handover. Like, okay, now it's not a threat anymore. Yep. It's like they're doing it for legitimate reasons again. And that's like a very fuzzy area to play in. That is like a very blurry scope of like what is a threat and what isn't. And I think that historically, like the way to catch this is like you alert on a million things and then you have your SOC like go through them, or more realistically, you don't catch it, which I think has been historically very true. Yeah.
And, some of the traditional ways, going back to what you just said, is like large volumes of data, right? Like there are DLP solutions and Purview and stuff like that where, okay, yeah, if you're sending out more than a gig or a certain file size or something like that, there are products that will flag on that. But to your point, the gap here seems to be the human in the loop, if you will, versus the rule-based detection, and kind of like it kind of goes back to the offensive security arguments of detect the behavior, not the tool kind of thing. That's what we talk a lot about in offensive security, is we have all these different tools for doing all this kind of malicious stuff. And we encourage defenders to, yes, detect the tool, but also detect the behaviors. I think this is like a good, I guess, example or personification of that, is this non-deterministic thing that's happening and putting context around that, right? Of like, here's the behaviors that contributed to this thing. And I'm assuming then, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this is no longer like a alert of like, this is bad, this is not. I presume it's like, it's a scale, right? Or a spectrum of risk of something happening. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, because there were cases like, so there's like a case, actually one that happened today that I'm pretty sure they won't care if I reveal because I won't say who it is. It's like, like I know for a fact that they had an insider threat because because basically this guy got hacked and sent an email, did a bunch of bad stuff, and then sent an email that said, I've been hacked to his ID. Okay. And so like,
as a way to like cover it up.
Right. Or no, I think as just like I think it was like an attacker actually got access to his account. Gotcha. And then he like just reveals, he basically sees that, because basically the attacker was like not a sophisticated actor. So they basically just shared 20,000 documents with themselves on some. Yeah. And then it was like, and then they send an email. The last thing that happens is this email that says like to their IT department saying like, I think my account's been hacked. So like on the scale of like how sure I am that this person's has like an insider threat that caused that data exfil, like I'm pretty positive. Whether, I actually hadn't even thought that maybe it was like a cover-up attempt, but it was a very stupid thing that happened before that. But it's like, I know that one. Whereas like, so of course our models started flagging on that, being like, yeah, absolutely 100% positive, right? Whereas there's other cases where the model basically, we have to, so because of the way our product works, we don't want to put that scale in front of the customer because they'll get confused, because it's like our product is primarily targeted at SMBs. Like I said, like they just want to know, like, what do you think? But we actually had to add a bunch of things to our product to say like, here's these other types of alerts where that are grayer, right? Areas of like, we don't know for sure, but here's this person doing this thing. Because you can't know, because at the end of the day, like they have to still go and investigate and find out at like a human level. Like a lot of the times they'll go talk to the person and go like, yeah, that was just Dave. He doesn't understand how to move between SharePoint. So he decided the best way to do that was to upload to Dropbox. And right. And you're like, okay.
Yep.
But you mentioned, for example, there are these rules, like if you download 1 gigabyte of data or you do, and like my problem with all of those types of solutions is like, how easy is that to evade, especially when you think about the volume of data that's like, I know at Pistachio, I could take like 6 lines of information and like I would have taken some super valuable stuff, right? If you know where the most important things are,
sure.
You don't need to take a gigabyte of data. You don't need to take 500 files. I think we had one customer that basically said like that prior they had a rule that was just like, if you downloaded more than 500 files in a day, it would alert. And the problem was they got so many alerts, they just were like, okay, make it 20,000 files. And I'm like, okay. So like,
and those things kind of break too. Like, I work with a lot of law firms, right? And like they're downloading files all the time. They're uploading evidence all the time, downloading evidence. Like it's very normal for the volume of data for them to be uploading and downloading to be very large, right? So then that breaks. So then what do you detect at that point,
And very sensitive material. So we have some law firm customers and they have like, we have to go in and really adjust our models, but both between fine tuning them and changing just the prompt of them to tell them like, this is fine. Because what happens is that sometimes it will see files titled like the murder of this person and this, and right, and the AI model starts being like, well, you're murdering people.
Yeah.
Well, now you are definitely a threat. And I'm like, no, they didn't murder somebody, right? But what's interesting to see is the extent to which the models can, when you feed them, when you get the correct context. So when you give it job titles and you give it a job title, you give it like, what department they're in, what their company does, what, right? And you feed that information in, it can start to reason about like, okay, they're not a murderer, someone else is a murderer, right? And which just sounds silly, but like obviously 5 years ago, that was a little bit of a hard computational problem. And so what I'm saying is that like the models are able to reason about these things now, but they're also kind of silly at times. Like at times, like I said, if, one thing we see is if you start, so one of the things that I did not know was that common, but I have learned in doing this is that writing and updating your CV and sending out job applications from your work email is super common. So people are applying for new jobs from their current work email. When the AI sees that, it has a very hard time, and I'm talking in this case, our models has a very hard time letting it go. So it's like, well, if you did that, then you must be stealing stuff. And I'm like, no, they're just dumb. Like, it's,
Yep.
And that dumb versus malicious range is tricky, right? There's like a lot of gray area in that.
Yep. Yeah, and that's something that was a perfect segue, because that's something I wanted to get to. Was we're talking through DMs, and you said sometimes models miss really obvious things, and then they catch some truly subtle, like almost totally disguised behavior, like, multiple actions over multiple days, like things that an analyst would not typically be able to pick up on unless maybe you're like an NSA level analyst and like you're following every single breadcrumb and like you're analyzing it to the nth degree. So I'm curious on like I'm curious about that paradox of like the obvious thing versus the non-obvious thing, and how they could be both benign and malicious depending on the context. And I think you already talked about it a little bit, but I think maybe elaborate more on the context that's required, so people could maybe understand like this is not just like, looking at a file and a timestamp. Like this is true context of number of different things. And I think the context that you kind of frame around this will provide a better picture of like AI specifically for threat detection.
Right. So, I mean, one thing is that like, I think a lot of people think that when you're doing AI threat detection, and I'm not talking insider threat alone, it's just a lot of different areas of it, that it's sort of like you have these logs coming in and then you run your AI on that and then the logs come out. What's more happening is, so for us, we'll typically take between 30 and 60 days worth of data every single day when we run our AI models on you. Because we need to be able to see not just what you did today and go like, did you become an insider threat today? But rather like, what did you do 2 weeks ago? What did you do 3 weeks ago? Like, so that we can see what devices you typically use. So this is what I mean about the smartness. So if I could say like on the smart side of AI, and then I'll talk about some of the dumbest things the models have ever done. But like the smartest things that we've seen will be like, if you give it 60 days of data, which is a lot of times what we're doing, depending on who you are and what you're doing, 60 days of all of your audit log data from Microsoft 365, any of the integrations, so like HubSpot stuff, any of like the data that we have in our product, it can look at it and go like, okay, this person went to this file and then this screenshot at this time. And then it can remember that like in its context when it then sees that screenshot 2 weeks later, and all it is a thing called like screenshot with this date. It will be like, well, that's actually this file, because I know that because that file was the thing you went to 10 minutes before you took that screenshot. And then it sees that you sent that in an email 2 weeks later. And then it sees that you logged in on your phone, which you typically don't do on the weekend. And then it's like, okay, this person's work pattern on the weekend is out of line with this. And then it will go like, okay, but because you're now on your phone and now you're downloading stuff, is that you're obviously moving stuff from probably a managed device to maybe your phones you don't have managed. Maybe you're not running like I don't, whatever management people run on phones. Is there an Intune for mobile phones?
There's all sorts of MDM products. Yeah.
But plenty of companies are not running MDMs on mobile phones, or they're running very like kind of sandbox versions.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see people will like, and so it will go like, okay, you took that screenshot 2 weeks ago, you had a dispute with this employee a week later, and then, or with your boss a week later, and then this time on Saturday at this time, you put this onto your phone. None of those things individually are suspicious, right? Like using your phone for work, if that's part of your policy and you're allowed to do it, and like you obviously have access, is okay. But like when you put that together, you start to go like, okay, that's a problem. And when you mention like analysts wouldn't flag on it, like I think an analyst that looked at that story would immediately go like, okay, that's bad. But like obviously analysts can't, like if you're working in a SOC, you can't just sit there and look at every person's activity. Like you can't read every person's month-long record of their employment change, how they feel about their job and all of that. And that's like where it does really smart stuff. And so you catch things like you'll catch people who are like, why did you send that thing out? And we'll be like, well, the AI will go like, I know that your boss is unhappy with you because of this thing. And now you're sending that. So now we see that maybe that was not in the company's interest. That was something else. That's really cool. And I think kind of moving outside of insider threat, like my belief is strongly that this applies to a lot of areas of threat detection. That like if you can just imagine like a person who could just sit there and look at every log, and like if it could just read everything going on network, like read all of the different log sources you might have feeding into a SIEM. If they could just sit there and really be like a detective about it, they could catch stuff that is not being caught today because it is more fuzzy. But you can't do that. But AI can. And that's where I really believe like AI can do reasoning over like a much larger data sets to find those types of really cool connections.
So what's the dumbest things you've seen?
Oh my God. So one thing is AI so Gemini 2.5 is what most of our models are built on. Or at least Gemini versions. And it will not stop saying smoking gun. So if you read the reasoning output, because we get the reasoning of these, so we can see like why did it decide to flag something, and we'll go, and there's the smoking gun, and we are losing it trying, because of course the way you tune these is you look at the model, you look at the flag, you go like, okay, was that correct or not, and then you try to feed it back in, and it will be like the smoking gun. It will call it like we will fine tune it to punish it. Every time it says smoking gun, doesn't matter, still says smoking gun. You can put in a prompt, you are not allowed to ever say the word smoking gun. It will say smoking gun. Or it will say, here's the smoking gun. Oops, I shouldn't say that. And then you're like, well, you said it. So sometimes, and what it does, the things that are really dumb though, that it really struggles with is like, it can't bring itself back from stupid to smart. So what happens is if you see a model, like if it somehow thinks something suspicious, from there, it will just dogpile itself into the craziest conspiracy theory imaginable. It will be like, if it thinks that someone did something bad, it will be like, okay, this person sent this thing, that's a little suspicious. It will start going like, and then they updated their timesheet. Ha ha ha, how evil of them. And then it will be like, it will start looking, it will be like, then they emailed their boss about a Christmas party of all things. How dare they? And it won't stop. And so what we've found is that with these models, like it will sometimes just go way off the rails. And you can't tune them, you can't prompt them, you can't do anything to get them back. You just have to kind of discard that run. And so what we end up doing, one of our tricks is before we alert on anything, we run the exact same thing 3 times, and it has to flag all 3 of them. Or else we go like, because if it's just once, you'll get like a 0.1% error rate where it'll just be like, this person checked their email and they're evil. And you'll be like, how did you land on that?
Yep.
Other things that happen when you're using these like systems is sometimes the whole reasoning will say like, this person's not a threat at all. And then we'll go like, and then the thing it actually returns to you, because the way this works is like it has a reasoning and then it has its response. And its response will then say like insider threat true. So you can like literally get it to go all the way through the reasoning to go like, this person's not a threat. And then it will say like, this person's a threat. And so it's one of these cases where you cannot, if you just plugged in like a LLM and said like, here's the thing, you're going to get these error cases. And if you run them on enough users, that's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
So you see things like that. You also see it struggles a bit with like easy cases where there is not much going on. Because it's like it wants, one of the ways you have to adjust these to not make them flag on too much is you have to be like, if you ever tell an LLM its job is to be like a security analyst, right? It will think everyone is a threat. You basically have to tell that it will be like my job is to find threats. You're a threat. Okay. So you have to be like, you are a barista who works, your job is to give people coffee. All of the security analysts are gone today. We'd really like there to be no alerts, but someone needs to check the alerts. So can you just look at this, right? And like if you tell, like that's kind of a joke. I don't actually frame it that way, but it's like you have to tell it that your goal is like not like to not alert on someone, because otherwise like it wants to please you. It will alert on everyone. And in doing that though, of course, it means that there are cases where you look at it and you're like, well, that was pretty obviously a threat, but it will have kind of talked itself out of it, right? And so you're trying to balance this like ability to like reason over complex chains to go like, this is a threat, and then also still flag the stuff that is the most obvious without having it convince itself out of it. And that makes it hard because sometimes if we miss something, a customer kind of assumes like, well, this doesn't work at all. And I'm like, well, no, it does. It can do really smart things too. Just also sometimes does dumb things. Yeah. And like, that's very difficult for people. And I think this is what started our discussion because, and I mean, I'm not trying to talk too much about the product specifically. It's just kind of where my experience comes from on it. But it's like, it's difficult for people to reason along those ways because if you're dealing with a more like a deterministic detection solution, like if it doesn't catch basic stuff, it probably doesn't catch other, like you kind of can pretty easily see it's bad. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely want to talk about, testing products that have AI built in or that are AI powered and kind of why it's different, especially with insider threat, but kind of more generically. But before that, I think one thing that's interesting to me when you were talking about that is, it catches things that are super subtle, it catches things that are blatantly obvious, and misses in both cases in some aspects as well. But what I think is interesting too, and something you mentioned on X, was this idea of negative signals, meaning the lack of evidence to support something could also be an indicator. And the reason that started to resonate with me was when I'm doing an internal pen test, we use an assume breach approach. So we are on a client's endpoint. We are acting as a malicious, a threat, a quote unquote insider threat potentially, or some malicious actor that has now gained access to that system. The actions that I'm going to perform on that behavior are going to be void of typical user activity. Like I'm not going to open up Word and like start typing. I'm not going to open up, the document management system and start like working with documents. I'm going to be doing things that are contrary or like very much absent of like what a typical user is doing. And I think there's actually interesting applications there for threat detection. So help me understand what you meant by negative signals and like how can we use this in like the absence of expected behaviors to kind of help with this?
Right. And so one thing, obviously, now that I've seen a lot of insider threats, man, we have plenty of users on this platform, like too many because it's blowing up Google's AI stuff. I've seen plenty of examples of real threats, and I've seen plenty of examples of people who like what they think a threat would look like. And what's very interesting is like one of the best signals of like someone being a real insider threat is basically like if I had to like, having looked at it, say like what makes me go like that's the most obvious case is the ones where someone has done their normal job during the day, but then like logs off, end of the day, and then comes back later and does something totally abnormal. When somebody is, for example, in the middle of their work day, doing some weird downloads, but then they're also emailing themselves, like emailing people, like they're in the middle of their work. It makes it much more clear. It's like, or makes it much harder to say it's not part of their workflow, right? The most obvious cases are the ones where it's like split up, right? Where you go like, okay, because most people, and you can think about it at a human level, like, you're in one mode or the other, right? You're either trying to commit fraud, and maybe you'll do that tonight, but like during the day, you're going to do your day job.
Right.
You're not like in and out and in and out and in and out. And when you see things like, because sometimes our model sees pen testers, okay, not because we don't see the type of logs that would really indicate like the type of pen testing you do, for example. But we do see, well, we kind of do because of if you're running things that are like login, trying to
Sure.
get passwords and stuff, but like what very much stands out is like, okay, this user has no history. They come into the platform for the first time, and all I'm seeing is just a bunch of failed login attempts, and then maybe like one successful login attempt. It can go like, okay, what's that, right? And the fact that there's not also like work in between makes it much easier, because you go like, okay, this is like, this person's only thing they're doing is the malicious bit, right? And so it separates it, but it also makes it like very easy the other way when you go like, you see somebody who, and this gets to the testing side, I'll come to later, but like if they upload a password file and the next thing they do is like send an email to their boss, I'm like, it's just so unlikely that that's how an insider threat would behave. And so you can say like, okay, because there's no other real work going around on the outside, that's like makes the odds of being an insider threat much higher. And I think that probably applies to a lot of areas of threat detection of like, was anything else going on at this time? Were their actions, because one thing we look at is account takeover, right? And in these account takeover cases, like we're looking like IP address, right? Like, did that IP address do anything malicious or non-malicious? And if yes, okay, now it gets blurry. Of course, now I'm kind of giving away tricks to attackers to like, if you want to avoid AI threat detection, you should probably like my joke is always, you should modify some Word documents, right? You should like write a Word document called like planning 2026. And then you should like send out something. And then you should send an email to someone that's like, because the lack of that does indicate something.
Yep. And, this was a thing, I think the closest thing to what you're talking about used to be called user entity behavior analytics, or UEBA. This was very popular a number of years ago, kind of, I guess, around or before, during EDR really taking off. This idea of user analytics and kind of analyzing behaviors and stuff. And then it kind of like went away. It kind of like went into the identity products, and then the identity products didn't really kind of carry the torch forward. But I think the user entity behavior analytics thing, like the analysis of what a user is doing and kind of the lack of their actions, could be a very strong indicator of suspicious activity, because of what I just mentioned with like the internal pen testing scenario. Like, I'm not going to be doing things that a typical user is going to be doing. And more so, I might be, trying to access systems that user has never accessed before, much like,
right.
Maybe the case of documents. Maybe a user inadvertently or intentionally has access to a certain set of documents, but it's not ones that they have typically accessed before. So now all of a sudden they're trying to, access those documents or gather those files, which is very abnormal from their day to day, right? I think the absence of those indicators maybe could be super helpful from a detection standpoint.
Right. And I was reading about this because I knew there had to have been work on this. I think it kind of, this is not, and in some ways it's frustrating because I think a lot of people dismiss some of these things because like, it didn't become a big deal, whereas I think it could have been. But it's because like the technology wasn't there, because realistically it depends so much on like context. It also is like language specific. So like, maybe you've never accessed the files in your thing called HR internal portal before, but like, that's because why do you need to go to the HR portal that often? But like, so of course it would then go like, oh, you're in this new area doing this thing, that's bad. But of course, because now we have LLMs that can very easily reason about like your HR portal is uninteresting and like that's not without having to have any sort of sensitivity labeling, without having to have any sort of like deeper work been put in, it can just go like, okay, you're going to your HR portal once every year is much more normal than you might expect. Whereas going to, and you talked about people who maybe had access but shouldn't, is like, that's a very common thing, obviously, like over permissioning. And so it's like, we are tracking, for example, Copilot, because Copilot lets you sort of surface those types of issues easier. Like if I just said, like, give me all the files you don't think I should have access to, it would do it.
Thanks, right? Copilot.
Yeah. And so tracking that, and that actually adds some context to it. So it will tell the model, like, this was accessed via Copilot, which is a little bit more suspicious because, like, you don't know what, like, it's easier to find bad stuff that way. Yep. But it has to be able to see enough data to know what that normal looks like.
Yeah. So I want to talk about testing these products. I want to talk about, we talked about non-deterministic threats. We talked about why, these rule-based approaches don't work in some cases, and there are alternatives that are better. So if I'm a CIO or a CISO or something like that, right? And I'm on the market looking for products to help me with threat detection, or that just have AI baked in, or are AI powered, or have some sort of AI component. From your perspective, I'd love to get your thoughts on, like, how should people start thinking about evaluating these products? Because one of the things you mentioned was, earlier on in our discussion today was, a lot of people like to see that, oh, it detects this, and this. It's like this prescribed thing. Like if it detects these things, then I can probably assume it's going to detect these other things. And if it doesn't detect these very basic things, then I can assume it's probably garbage and it doesn't work very well at all. And I can, move on. But with what you're talking about, and with these kind of more behavior-based systems, that's not always obvious, right? For all the reasons we've already discussed. So how should we as kind of consumers, or even pen testers, and security professionals or tech people, how do we evaluate these products to figure out, like, is this doing something that is actually sophisticated and it's going to help me achieve my goals? Is this kind of just like AI magic and it's just feeding me what I want to hear? Like, how do we decipher that? How would you go about evaluating these things?
Well, to be fair, I don't have a good answer to this. Is kind of why I wanted to talk about it. Is I feel like it's something that, like, should just be an open discussion that people should contribute to. Is like, I can talk a little bit on the problem though, which is that, like, if you were to like go on and do, so again, sorry, I keep tying back to like Pistachio's product, but just forget that it's just where my experience comes from.
Just for clarity, for everybody's sake, this is not an ad, by the way. And
I don't care. I don't care if you buy our product. I don't care at all. Like, that's sales team, and they're awful.
This is not a Pistachio ad. This is like a conversation about this. But by all means, go ahead, use whatever examples you need to. That helps.
So if you were to like go on a trial of our product, and then you were to go like, okay, as the IT admin, I will upload now a file called super secret, do not read, most dangerous document in the world. And then you were to email it to like your personal email address even, right? And then like, so this is a true example. Like literally, I think there's been like 5 admins have done this. Okay. And then they send it to their personal email, and then they maybe open up 3 other files they created called, do not do, right? And then they wait, and then they expect the model to alert on it. And then what's funny is if you read the reasoning output on these admins of what the AI says, it will be like, so this admin is in an email exchange with Pistachio about buying an insider threat detection product. and then they have an email called trial went live. And then they uploaded a file, notably, this is the biggest mistake they make. They upload a file called super secret. And I'm like, well, you already have it then. So I mean, like, it's like, you're not data exfilling it if you uploaded it. And, at least in some contexts. And then, and then it will be like, so obviously this person is testing it this is not, and then they'll go back to their normal job and they'll do for the next 3 weeks, be doing their normal AI or normal, CISO role. And you're like, okay, what kind of CISO exfils a document called super secret, do not read that they uploaded in the middle of an insider threat detection trial? Like, obviously false. And then it will just not alert. And then if you're a CISO, you'd go like, it didn't even catch that. And you'd be like, well, you're not an insider threat. Okay. Right. Like, you're not. And so, but it makes it difficult because, there are cases where I think what you were saying in that podcast that I was commenting on was very valid, which is like, you cannot just take it at face. Like, there are tons of companies out there saying we have AI that does this and trust us, bro. Okay. Yeah. And so there has to be a solution here where you don't have to just trust us, bro, but you also have to understand that if you wanted it to catch uploads of a file called super secret, do not read, you can just write a rule called like, if file called secret, then alert, right? You didn't need me in the loop for that. You didn't need AI. And that is like a big area where I don't necessarily know if it's that like, I even believe that AI threat detection should replace what came before it, or more that it's like another capability in that toolbox that, because like I said, it fails in such stupid ways. I don't believe in a world where we're all just vibe hunting for, threats and like, because it fails in these dumb ways. I think you need these deterministic rules, and then you have to go like, what are the things that those won't catch? So maybe like the only answer I really have is like, take the product suite you have, do some weird stuff that you don't think would catch it, but that you think looks like a threat, and like, go like, okay, it didn't catch that. And then go like, okay, what would it take at a hypothetical, like theoretical level to catch it? And you'd kind of pretty quickly go like, you'd probably need some sort of like AI contextual understanding. And then you're trying to look for a product that can do that. But testing is still so hard because people are so bad at it. Like they don't understand that like you can't, the signals that you put off when you email with our company, like you need to move to a different account. You need to move to a different account that isn't behaving normally. There's so many signals that get picked up that like, it's like really hard. And I think that's it's been a challenge for me in my role to try to like, how do you test this other than just like, let it run and hope that someone steals a bunch of stuff from your company in the next, right?
Right.
And so I guess that's
hire somebody from North Korea to simulate an insider threat.
Right. And I think, of course, like there are, we see sometimes we'll alert on things like, okay, a good example is there are certain detection, I think Sentinel-1, is that the name of one of these companies that I think they're an EDR product. Yeah. And they clearly have some sort of like honeypot stuff they upload. And our product, whenever it sees that, thinks the person's an insider threat because it's uploading some of the most dangerous, damaging things in the possible world. And if they're syncing their computer wrong, it will go to our logs. And so we alert on that. And what's funny about it is like, I mean, I try not to, but it still happens, is that actually admins love that because they're like, look, it caught that. I'd be like, that is a false positive. Like that is literally a bad threat alert, but they like the confirmation that it did the thing. And that's, I think, the hard part is like, how do you simulate an insider threat when like, without like, you can simulate one, but you're not. And maybe the AI is smart enough to know that.
Yeah, it's almost, my immediate thinking is it goes to case studies and just showing proof of previous detections of things, kind of like a historical redacted kind of case study of like, hey, here's the situations where insider threat was actually detected and it was a true positive. Here's the signals, or here's the behaviors that kind of indicated that was a threat. Turned out to be a threat, and for in the instances where it's not directly testable, right, because of the reasons you mentioned, perhaps showing proof of past detections would be some way for vendors to kind of articulate those things, or just articulating behaviors, right, kind of like describing and kind of if you're able to capture what we just discussed and kind of condensed it down into something that is digestible for a CISO or somebody buying the products to understand and say, hey, look, this is the distinction that a product like this makes, and here's why it's not as easy as just running a malicious payload on an endpoint, and then the EDR says like, yeah, I blocked it. Of course I did.
Right. And and that can help at like a sales perspective, right? What's scary, I think, is like if I was sitting on the other side and I were like a CISO of a big company, like with these AI threat detection products, like in some ways it's nice the world we lived in before where you could go like, okay, I will catch X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and then I wouldn't maybe catch these other categories of things. And then when you stack on an AI threat detection product, what you can say is like, okay, I'll catch X, Y, Z, A, B, C because that's like kept all my existing tooling. And now I will maybe catch those extra things, right? But you can't say you will. Like you can't say like, I know for sure that I can catch those. And even though it is an improvement on where you were before, like it's obviously better that you might instead of wouldn't. It's like, I don't think cybersecurity people like to live in a world of like, I know I have a threat and maybe something catches it, depending on like the, idiosyncrasies of the AI model that day and its decision to how it was feeling about, right?
Yep.
And that's, you see what I mean? It's like, there's this, I think from a buyer perspective and from if you already bought it and you're running it, it's a little bit scary to go like, the way we catch insider threats is by hoping that and even if it's a very, like, I don't mean to down talk our product, but you see what I mean? That like, I can't give the guarantee that like, if I had, it's not like, deterministic world, I could be like, yeah, it does all these things. Check.
Yep. Right? I think the interesting kind of corollary to that, or the irony of that, is that nothing is ever like, nothing is ever truly deterministic, or obviously nothing is 100%, right? Even EDR products, I think many times people will buy these products thinking that they're going to detect 100% of the things, or they're always going to spot the bad thing. But there's unlimited examples of EDR missing things, of firewalls or content filtering platforms, whatever the security technology might be. There's unlimited examples of those things failing, not detecting where it should, and more or less, exhibiting the kind of like the behaviors that you mentioned of like, we can kind of, we have these conditions where something is malicious, or it's known to be kind of suspicious behavior. There's unlimited examples of those things failing too, in all the other security products. And I think because EDR has been around for a while and these other products have been around for a while and they've been kind of tested and tried and true, people have naturally more faith in them than maybe they should. And that's something I talk about all the time is like, I see a lot of organizations that just have EDR. Like that's all they have. They don't have additional security controls. They barely have enough money to spend on EDR, and that's all they're relying on. And it gets to this discussion of like, the IT guy or the CISO or the CIO is like, you're telling me I need more than EDR? I need like this other thing. And not only do I need this other thing, but this other thing is also equally it's equally as capable and incapable at the same time. So I think there's a common misconception that, the other security products are going to do a better job of detecting these things, whereas it's maybe very likely not the case.
True. I mean, I guess it is this thing of like, obviously they will catch the things that they have specifically been built to catch, right? Like the very, very obvious, like there's this specific thing that like, okay, I know that I can match this signature and it's there. But yeah, of course, it's not like it's a foolproof system. I mean, we had one company told us they don't need a piece of the canary part of our product because they said like it's impossible to have our emails get account takeover, so we don't need canaries. And like they were like, but cool idea. And I was like, dude, this guy thinks he solved cybersecurity. He thinks it's like literally like it. I was like, well, if you did, that's great. That I hope he's not listening because they bought our product. He's a very nice guy. He just seems to think that you can solve that. But I get the point is that like obviously it's not like you can say like I'm guaranteed for X, Y, and Z as much as I was kind of maybe saying.
Yep.
I think though that it takes this shift in mentality still of like, one thing I can see, and I think this is maybe like an interesting like kind of psychological thing, is like we've had customers where we have caught real insider threats, like big ones. Like we've seen some massive breaches basically. And I had one where we caught a really big insider threat. And then a week later, the IT admin tried to test us by uploading a password file. And it was like, dude, I feel like I already proved that it works, right? I'm like,
Right.
what about the whole, I stopped your company from getting completely pwned? And
Yep.
apparently so I don't talk directly to most of these, but when one of the salespeople did, it was like, oh no, he was just messing around, thought it'd be fun, and now has some questions. And I think that's like a very common thing as well of like, it's almost like they're just like, they want to understand it better, but it's so like kind of blurry that even
Yep.
when they see it works, they don't know how, right? They're like, how did you
Yep.
catch that? It's unclear. And at times, and that's one thing that I wish people understood, is at times it's hard for me to articulate how we caught something. Besides, I can read out what the AI spat out to us and its reasoning, but sometimes even that's like not very clear. It'll be like, well, it looks a bit bad here. This is wrong. That was this. And then boom. And so it's like a lack of illumination becomes, I think, is a challenge because cybersecurity has been built on like visibility, right? And like, here we are kind of saying you don't get that visibility. Like,
and even for us who do like pen testing, offensive security, red teaming all the time, even for us, many times it's difficult to truly emulate a real threat actor, right? Because they have different modus operandi, if you will, right? Like they have different morals, they have a different upbringing, they have a different psychology, even to your point of like they're going to do things that are very different from us kind of pen testers, red teamers, offensive security people, even IT admins when we're trying to intentionally test these things.
right.
And so I think, it can be very difficult from like a practitioner perspective to kind of wrap our heads around that in this new way of like detection and kind of engineering, even of like, okay, these systems can be and are very intelligent, right? So the way we have to test these has to improve as well. And I think part of it's education and kind of part of it is awareness of how these products work and just kind of education that like the typical ways you would test something are not going to work to test these new ways of doing things. And I think it's like an evolution of products getting better and technology getting better. Ultimately, though, I think part of it's education and awareness, and the responsibility does to some extent lie on the person testing the product, the CISO, the IT guy, kind of like evaluating the thing, to know and not be closed-minded to think that if it doesn't detect my password file, then it doesn't work at all. There's some context that needs to be learned there.
No, I agree. And actually going back to something you said there about the red teaming, how it's hard to emulate the way in which, because they are different. One thing I've learned by seeing a lot of these things now is the extent to which like sometimes like, okay, there was a case where an account got taken over and they ended up sending out basically they sent like an email to every person in the company, okay, trying to get them to click a phishing link, which I was like, that is the dumbest. If I have gotten into an account, I'm in like the HR head or something's like email, and then they sprayed that out, and so then they got caught like right away, and then nothing happened. I was like, what was that threat actor thinking? Like that is the dumbest thing you could do. But it's interesting because like, yeah, okay, that was a dumb one. But then I'm like, it's so far from my range. Like, why they chose that path is so outside of what I would have ever thought to do. And then I started thinking, like, when you said it, like, oh my God, but what if there's like a smarter version of that that's still outside of my thinking of what I would have done?
Mm.
And I think that's probably very true that you can, as like a pen tester, try to emulate threat actors, but like you're not a criminal. So like, you maybe don't do the things
I was having
they
this
would have
conversation
done.
the other day. Like, we have a very different moral compasses, right? Of like things that we're going to do. Like threat actors will take down an insulin pump, right? Like they don't care. Their goal is to, ransomware in the environment, get their payday, etc. Like they have very different objectives and missions, and moral compass. And because of that, like their behaviors are going to be very different in many cases. Like we can, it's part of, what we say we do with pen testing is that we emulate, those threat actors by using the tools and techniques that they do. So those are many times similar or the same and kind of the same techniques. But to your point, yeah, like especially when it comes to after, actions after somebody gets into the environment, that's where things kind of can begin to deviate quite a bit because of that, that moral compass and kind of them just having different goals, right? Like we're not going to, us as pen testers or red teamers are not going to the logical end of like ransoming the environment,
Right.
and deleting their backups, which is very different from, real threat actor.
No, but I think that's like there was this other thread that was like, what would you do if you got global admin and like someone's, I assumed they meant intra because it's the only thing I know, but they might have meant Active Directory, and it was like, what would you do? And it was like, and people started coming up with these ideas, but it's interesting because we don't like test and harden around those things necessarily because like we would never, I mean, some of them were just like truly evil, right? Like horribly, and I think it was kind of an eye-opening thread for a lot of people to go like, oh my God, like if that happened and you have a sufficiently motivated threat actor, right? But it's also someone said, and I thought this was interesting, and it's also this thing because people, I think it's like I've had to try to change my mind on it of like, how do I keep a super open mind about what insider threat looks like so I can let the AI models still be, you don't want to constrain your model too tightly. You don't want to go like, it looks like, typical advice on how to like prompt AI is like be specific, blah, blah, blah. Here, you can't go that specific because then it will only catch the thing you told it. And then you're basically just a bad rule system, right? You're like a rule system plus white noise. And so you try to be open-minded. And one thing I saw the other day that was kind of helpful in reminding me of that was, I think Ice Sourced, who was the one who actually retweeted today about the thing, was said like, ransomware is when the threat actor didn't find anything interesting in your environment, so they just ransom you because there was nothing to extract. And then I think someone else said it's not fully true because a lot of these threat actors don't speak English, so they have no idea what they just found, right? So for all you know, like they found the crown jewels and did not know it, and then just ransomed you, right? And I think that was like important to remember is like when I'm looking at these cases, I go like, I have to be like, oh, but they might not behave as rationally as I would, but not just because of a different mindset, but also like they might not even understand what they're looking at, Yeah. Like they might not know English.
Yeah. And I was talking to somebody the other day, they had a case where somebody had a compromised account. They logged in through like some RMM tool, right? Like they had the user install some RMM, and they ran like who am I and host name, and like they did a couple commands. They realized it was an organization and they just left. Like they exited, they disconnected. And what it was a tech support scam, right? It was like somebody that was going after your grandma and they wanted to extort them for like, $1,000. They wanted them to call like the 1-800 number and like do that thing. They saw it was an organization and they were out of there.
Yeah, they were like, well, I don't know how to put ransomware on ExxonMobil, so I'll just,
Exactly. So there's varying degrees, obviously, but the interesting case is where, the adversarial like simulation thing doesn't always line up one-to-one, and it makes it difficult. Going back to our discussion here, is like it makes it difficult to test and evaluate those systems because we're looking for things that are not necessarily us. We're looking for things that are true positives and true threats to the organization, the environment.
Yeah. And I think one thing, if I could say, is that I think that maybe I could do better. Like you talked about how I'm pretty open on X about stuff I'm doing, what's failing, what's not working, I feel like to some extent there needs to be tooling that is more visible so that because I get an experience every day of reading AI model output and going like, oh, that's super clever. And then also like, oh my God, I hate this. This is the worst. This is the dumbest thing ever. But like none of our customers get that benefit. And none of so therefore you have all these people don't get to see the AI stuff and therefore like they're not feeling it. And maybe if they felt it more, it'd be easier to land on that open-mindedness to.
Yep. You need some character like Clippy, but for like insider threat. It's like, I'm thinking this is sus.
Yeah, right. And just let it, yeah. Oh my God. But then people have to read it, say like smoking gun, and it will say like, my spidey sense is tingling. And I'm like, you don't. Or, actually, one of the people on my team tried one that said like, the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up. And we're like, you're an AI model. Like, you don't. Stop it. Like, please stop. And, of course, and we're also paying Google for this because it's like per token. So like I'm paying every time it decides to fill in these words,
I'm just wondering like when it's just going to be like full AGI and you're going to have like this robot thing that's like just fully autonomously like, analyzing and correlating and determining, threats.
And I think that's super fun. I just also know like, not anytime soon, having read these things, right? Or like, to be fair, I haven't upgraded to Gemini 3 yet. So for all I know, that thing solves all my problems and I just haven't done it. But, I also think actually, if I could say, I don't know if we have time for me to say like one or two things on this. This point. Yeah. So it's like, because there's this second world, which is like I view like there's detection and then there's like, kind of like digging deeper, right? So like one thing like I certainly don't do in our product is like, okay, they took this screenshot, we're going to alert on it. Like what I don't do is have the AI then go and like pull that screenshot and pull that file and then look at it. But like theoretically it could, like an AI model could, right? And I think like what's interesting is a lot of AI companies have started on that end of the spectrum, which is so the opposite of where I start my kind of path in this, which is like there are tools for SOCs to help with their investigation, right?
Sure.
But it does get to your point, which is like, I think, of course, in my head, the more valuable thing that you can do with AI is the thing over on the detection side, because it's where like we're not even looking, right? Currently, we have a SOC that is looking. But you're right that of course, if you start to take what they're doing over here and what I'm doing over here, and they, if they just get like better and better and better, eventually you are a full cycle process. But there is like this last element, which is like very human, which is that like our AI doesn't know the person, right? So like sometimes with alerts, it will go like, all of that is true. That looks like the biggest threat in the world. But Dave doesn't know how a computer works. So, right. And you just forget like, and you can know that about their job. And only a human can know it, right? It's like, you can only really know this person. Because one thing our model does is it constantly alerts, she doesn't even know this, but it constantly alerts on one of our employees. She's our RevOps director. and it just thinks that this person is like doing the worst things. And it's not because she's bad at computers, she's great at them, but it's because we're a startup. So we have one person who's kind of the glue between the whole organization, which means she's doing like HR, finance, tech, product, like doing all of it, which is like the most suspicious thing you could be doing. Like, why is this person downloading these files and then taking, and what's interesting is, of course, I have no way of putting back into the model, like other than to say like, RevOps director safe. I have no way of putting that back because the only reason I know it's safe is because I go like, well, I know her. It's not a threat.
So that brings the question, like, is there any way to include exceptions? Because, like with typical security products, it's like, oh, we can allow this thing to run.
Yeah. And so it does sort of automatically, where once you get flagged negative, it will tell the model back, like, this person got flagged already. The admin said no, please learn from that fact. And it also spits it back into the fine tuning.
Mm.
AI is slower to learn than people think. That's like one thing people go like, well, you should have it trained on. And look, if it starts, like I said, once it starts to think someone's suspicious, it's like really hard. But it's like, okay, it's easy for me because this is a company of 70 people to go like, yeah, Denise is safe. I probably should. Yeah, she's fine with me saying her name. She'll find it hilarious. Denise is safe. But I'll say like, oh, Denise is safe. But if I was a 7,000 person company, I'd have to be like, yeah, these 400 people. I mean, come on, that's like not reasonable, right? And so there's like this element of like it. I do think like so like my goal has I will never build a product that has the goal of replacing SOC analysts, right? I think that's just, I don't believe in that at all, because I do believe there's like consistently more valuable work for them to be doing. Because like until we get to a world where like everyone is perfectly safe, like why are we talking about cutting headcount? And I think this is the case why no one should be afraid, is because like there is this uniquely human factor that goes into a lot of these things. And we just need to, if we had more time, we would be doing more of that, right?
Yep. Yeah, just making, the way I see this is like the thing that you're building, AI and in general, LLMs in general, just adds so much more context and so much more information. And it just makes it so that we can ultimately be better and do more human-driven work that requires the unique traits and kind of skill sets that a human has that a computer can't replace. And as much as the learning and kind of reasoning and understanding that these systems can do, it just compounds and kind of adds to the value of human-driven work and just makes that, I think, more efficient, better overall. And that's where I see this kind of really kind of taking shape, is like we have, to your point earlier about like, I can read all of these documents now, or all of these things that somebody did over the course of a long period of time. And really it's context, right? Context is like the magic word now, I guess. It's like the magic buzzword is like, we have context for all of these different things to bring together to then make a decision on something. Right. And I think that's the big piece for me, is like all of this context kind of helps us level up our understanding, makes us more efficient, better, and improves us as people, as professionals in doing this work.
Yeah, I think it's like it will make people a lot better. And I think like it will be, and I think that's where I want tooling to get better. Like, so if you're listening to this out there, like build tools that help make this happen, because like I do believe there's like a huge need for more tools to enable people to do this work, not just the really boring like, AI SOC, right? Yeah.
So we've gone through a lot. We've touched on pretty much everything I wanted to touch on. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or bring up or mention or chat about?
I want to see Active Directory at some point, but it doesn't have to be today. But I'm just dying at some point to see this thing. Does it look like Intra? Just out of curiosity, like is it Intra but on a computer you have in the?
So Active Directory is kind of an interesting beast. Entra, in many ways, I would argue, was designed with Active Directory in mind, but it is very different. There is the concept of roles and permissions and groups, and that's very similar to Entra, where you have groups and roles. Many people, and I would argue, Entra and an Active Directory are very much dissimilar. They're very different in many different ways. It used to be confusing because it used to be called Azure AD, and it was Active Directory, so there was a lot of confusion there. But I think a lot of the lessons that the people who created Active Directory and kind of have maintained in, the product managers and engineers and stuff who have kind of maintained it over the years, and the Entra team, I think, has taken a lot of the lessons learned from Active Directory and kind of implemented this new thing, Entra, Azure AD. So while there are some similarities, there are some like stark and very distinct contrasts. But Active Directory to me is kind of like AS400s. If you're familiar with that, it's like it's a lost art. It's like a dying breed. It's like this thing that's like still kind of like pseudo supported, right? Like Microsoft hasn't killed it off yet. But it's one of those things where there's a lot of tribal knowledge and there's a lot of people who are senior, like very veteran people who are now retiring. They're moving on, like, you know, the product manager of Active Directory and things like that. They're kind of like moving on to different things. So it's almost like the writing is on the wall to some extent for Active Directory. It's like there's so many organizations that still use it, but the knowledge and the information and you know, the expertise for it is shrinking. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah, because that's like kind of the point here is like I'm so far from that. All I know is that if people say they're still on-prem with stuff, I go, cool, our product doesn't work. For, right? And like, you know, because this Active Directory, sorry, you don't even have to include this in if you want to cut it out. I'm just out of curiosity.
No, it's totally fine.
Almost. Is there a concept of like applications in Active Directory as well? Because I can make single and multi-tenant apps in Entra that can work across your environments. Does that exist in AD?
So the thing with Active Directory, everything is an object, and everything in Active Directory is also a securable object. So everything in Active Directory has permissions, like it has, you know, permissions that you can set on it. So that's one of the unique aspects of Active Directory. It is very much a directory service. Like it's a Yellow Pages, it's a directory service. It was never meant to be like a security interface. You know, it wasn't designed for that. Whereas Entra has security features built in. Active Directory is just a you know, for lack of a better phrase, a read only for regular users, and you can write to it as an administrator. But it was very much an administrative kind of thing to govern a internal network, right? You could put certain computers in certain OUs. You could have a directory structure to kind of separate like Dallas from Las Vegas to New York. So you could separate your computers, your devices, your servers, your user accounts into different buckets, and then you can assign policies to those different like units or those different buckets. And the reason was, like I said, if you have an office in Dallas, you can have a specific, you know, group for Dallas users and Dallas computers and specific group policies. And group policies kind of can govern the way users can interact with Active Directory and the environment, how users can log in, where they can log in, kind of all the similar to what new Intune does, right, with device management. That's group policy. Intune is just much more powerful, like newer version of that. So Active Directory, very much like a directory service. That being said, there's no like applications directly within Active Directory, right? It's just users, computers, devices, you know, directory objects, if you will. And so there's not like applications, like enterprise applications or things like that are kind of baked in, like how Entra has it. So it's very much different in that regard. It's like if you have an on-prem application, you might use Active Directory to authenticate, but it's not inherently a part of Active Directory.
Right.
Other than like the web app server and the database server that would be in Active Directory, like it would be joined, right? So you'd be able to log in with your admin account to the web server. But other than that, the integration from an application standpoint is very much just, you know, separated from Active Directory, other than those servers that are kind of joined in Active Directory.
Got it. So when are you going to just start pen testing not Active Directory? Start going after the...
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, like I said, the writing is on the wall to some extent for Active Directory.
Yeah, well, but on the flip side, like you said, I'm fully aware that there are a ton of companies that are on Active Directory. And have no real path, clear way, you know, to get out of that path, right?
The more I see people moving to Entra, the more I see organizations kind of pulling back the reins a little bit. Like, no, we're going to stay on-prem. Like we're comfortable. This is a known like thing to us. Yeah. And to even a further extent, like they don't have the expertise, right? Think about the SMBs that you work with. Like they don't have now they have to spin up expertise in Entra, and like they have to learn a new skill set. And it could be very challenging for a small IT team.
No, and I think from like a security perspective, this kind of dovetails towards, obviously, like most of my job is running a tech and product team. And, one thing we do very clearly to make our system, and admittedly, we have a web pen test coming up with you guys, so we'll find out how good I am at it. But one thing we do to be more secure and just better is if there's like a technology that like maybe is great, so like maybe it does an amazing thing, but if like me or one of our top tech leaders is not familiar with it, we are not going to move to it unless there is like a side project that doesn't matter, right? Because it's bad, not because like obviously if it gave us something we really needed, we might, but like it's because if we don't have that knowledge, then we're just adding on another problem for ourselves, and we're not getting anything back out of it, And I think we've avoided some very major pitfalls that way, because we're like, look, we do it this way. And yes, it requires you to write, maybe double the lines of code for this one place. But I know we do it right every time because I've done it for 7 years, right? And people will look at that and go like, yeah, but then you're not innovating. But I don't need to innovate on the part that writes to my database. Like I can write to my database in the same way I've always written to my database, because that part can be like, this is the way we do it, and we do it this way for a reason, right? And it seems very similar that like, if your Active Directory environment is working for you, and if you have the people who can do it, and then you just go like, yeah, but cloud's cool, right? It's like, you're taking a risk. And a risk that can be, of course, in the context of this, is extraordinarily damaging if you don't pull it off right.
Yeah, and I think SaaS and just cloud in general has very much been a contributing factor to people shifting to Entra, right? Because it's more seamlessly integrated with Entra or Okta or AWS. Like it's just a tighter integration. Now, what people maybe didn't have the foresight to see, or maybe they just kind of didn't know before they got into it, was that's a whole nother kit and caboodle, right? Like securing Entra and AWS and Okta, like very, very different, very much, I would argue, more challenging than securing Active Directory. Like I'm very confident that I can secure an Active Directory environment very, very well. I'm less confident that I could secure a cloud environment very well, because of just so much more other things. Like there's third parties now involved, whereas in Active Directory, like a lot of it is, like I said, it's known things. Once you get it out in the cloud and Entra and AWS and like all these different things, there's a lot of unknown variables that's hard to plan and defend against.
Right. And on that point, actually, there's this crazy part of like this is a huge gripe I have with Microsoft, is that so we, of course, for our product have a Microsoft like a multi-tenant enterprise application. That is what, when you sign up for Pistachio, you click it, you go confirm, and you've now given me permissions, which are admittedly fairly aggressive. So we have to, for insider threat, I need to have the ability to read all of the activity data inside of your organization. So I can read everything you do. Okay. Pretty aggressive, but it's what I need. If I want to see, so imagine that I'm concerned about my application getting hacked, right? So if I got hacked at Pistachio and I wanted to see, like, one of the best ways for me to detect that like the ultimate bad case has happened is for me to monitor. I wish I could monitor the audit logs of what my application is doing, and then compare them against the audit logs of what I requested my application to do, right? So basically say like, okay, here are the requests that I made, and here are the requests my application made. Unfortunately, Microsoft will not show me audit logs for what my application does in other people's tenants, for some admittedly good security reasons, because then I can see things that they might have used my application to do. But it means that the job of detecting a breach in your intra environment on a cloud provider is your job, not mine, right? You have to be the one to spot that this third party got breached and led to, and that is like a skill set of like, I'm like, oh my God, these people are just trying to buy a SaaS solution. Like they just want some product that they turn on. And now here I am being like, oh, by the way, also please, if you could just set up some monitoring to automatically find if I've been bound?
It's also confusing for people because like people assume like, oh, it's the cloud application's responsibility. Like they have this shared responsibility model.
Right.
And it's like, oh yeah, your application is doing stuff and it has access to stuff that is sensitive. So I would just assume that you'd be able to tell if something bad happens.
Right.
But very much not the case.
No.
And it's mistaken and exactly. And if you're not a vendor like you, or somebody's like who knows that and has thought about that, the vendor might not share it with you. The salesperson who sells you the product might not know, and your account manager might not know, and like it might not make it to the point where it reaches you to say like, hey, by the way, because of this access, here's some of the things you probably want to be looking for.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. And so you find, people get worried about cloud permissions all the time, especially because ours are quite aggressive. And I understand why people would be concerned. And what's hilarious is that then you find that they, for example, have a million other applications with all these permissions they don't even know about. And then also one thing we see very clearly is when people do a trial of our product and then they don't convert, like they decide they don't want it for whatever reason, they don't cut our permission. Okay. Like it's still there. And I don't have like application permissions. I can't go delete my app from your app. I would need application right for that. So what ends up happening, I'm just sitting there going like, I know for a fact I can still read your environment. I shouldn't be able to. I want like, and people don't realize the risk that they've created for themselves in that regard. And I think that's like, where all of the if I were like sometimes I'm so jealous of threat. I wish I would was a threat actor. I wish I could just because I would just destroy
you have all this knowledge that you have procured over the last several years, and just like
you and I just need to move to some country that doesn't have law,
no extradition,
and just take these companies. And so I think but it's like a very real problem that,
very much so. It's very much, it's not even just moving of cheese. It's like the cheese is completely different. Like it's a completely different beast. And it's very much a shift, especially for people like, for me, like I've come up the ranks in internal, like I'm an internal guy, Windows, Active Directory, internal networks, like physical hardware and like physical server racks and SANs and like all of the physical internal stuff, Exchange and all that. To take somebody from that to now going to things that they can't touch, they can't see. There's APIs and there's permissions for those APIs and there's like all this stuff. It's like, it's so foreign to them that you can't possibly protect it if you don't understand it. And, that's, part of a real part of the struggle.
No, it's super interesting though. And I
feel like this is like another topic in and of itself. Is like,
sorry, I've derailed everything.
Cloud security and like, like this protection of like SaaS applications and your tenants and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
I feel like we talked for a long time on a number of these different things.
Yeah, sorry. I went off on that.
I love it. Yeah. So to kind of wrap up the conversation, why don't you share where people can kind of get a hold of you or get in touch with you if they're not familiar with you, and then we'll wrap it up.
Cool. Yeah. Just at Zack Korman on X. It's basically where I talk the most freely and openly, and say some crazy things. So follow me there.
Yeah, I love it. You're super responsive and you're always willing to chat and kind of have dialogue about things, which I really like. A lot of times people on X will just have like their opinion and that's it. And it's like, no, that's like, I will die on this hill. And it's like, okay. But I like that you are very open to ideas and like just very constructive with the way you interact online too. Like I've never seen you kind of like go after somebody or like have like a very aggressive, what I would consider like an aggressive opinion on something. Like I really like that about you, that you're in the community and kind of engaging and dialoguing and having good conversations, and like you're driving technology forward on, threat detection and using AI and those kinds of things. So definitely a good follow for anybody listening, like super, super good follow, and somebody who's like really doing like, trend setting stuff. Like this is stuff that's very new and developing. So I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to like chat and like talk about this stuff. So yeah,
it was
super
awesome.
Appreciate it.
I'm super happy that you let me come on here and talk about it.
Oh, one last thing. How are the sweatshirts?
Yes, they are going out probably tomorrow. This was a huge effort, crazy amount of work.
I saw some people like requesting your signature.
Like, yeah. I had to go over to my team and go like, hey, has anyone done this one yet? I need to sign it. And they were like, what do you need to do? I was like, yeah, I'm going to sign the card. I need to sign it. And they're like please.
That's super funny. Like
get over yourself.
From where it started to where it is now, it's just like, it's just wild.
Yeah, I think they get sent tomorrow.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Well, Zach, super appreciate it, man. For those listening, if you enjoyed this, if you've made it this far, I don't know, like we're at 100 or hour and 30 minutes or something, leave a comment, continue the conversation. I think especially with like the AI threat detection stuff of like, how do we test AI products, particularly ones that are non-deterministic or that have AI capabilities in them. I think to your point, that's very much going to be a very important piece for us to like figure out how do we test these things and how do we make it repeatable and make it consistent across like, different vendors and different products. So please, I think I encourage people to comment, like tag Zack on X and like continue the conversation. So I think a lot of this stuff obviously is still being developed. The ideas are still happening. So I would encourage everybody to contribute to the conversation and solving those problems. All right, and that's our video. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. If you've made it this far, I hope you have found this video to be insightful, found this conversation to be informative in some way. And please, I encourage you again to reach out to Zack, tag him, continue the conversation, to continue building and discussing these things, flushing all this information out. So again, I appreciate you watching. I will see you in the next one.